Hey everyone, my name is Tammy and I am a Pink Boots Canada member, and I'm doing this video so I can go over the course that I won through a scholarship earlier this year. So this is my pay it forward. I hope you find it helpful. If you're wondering whether or not this is the right scholarship to apply for you, or if you're just looking for more information about the course in general to sign up for separately, hopefully this kind of helps you with some more inside information. And if you're watching this video and you have questions that maybe I didn't address on certain topics that I didn't cover, please feel free to send me a message or email me, and I will provide my contact information at the end so you can do that. Okay, so what is this course? This is the beer recipe design course from KPU, which is Kwantlen Polytechnic University in British Columbia, near Vancouver. So I have been brewing either at home or professionally for 10 years now. And despite the fact that I learned how to brew like from the ground up, like I got the basic equipment, I worked at a home brew supply store with some really knowledgeable people, and then I did an actual master's level program, I still felt like there were a lot of things about brewing and the recipe part that I didn't understand, but I wanted to get better at. So I've used programs like Brewer's Friend, I've used Beersmith, and I have used Brewing Water. And they're all great. And if that works for you, then like, hey, use what works for you. I just wanted to learn certain things so that I could create a recipe from scratch that worked, but also I could take a recipe that I had done, maybe years ago, that I'd created years ago, and scale it up for a larger batch size if I was on like a larger brew house. So I would say that's the reason I applied. I wanted to just kind of refresh my chemistry, refresh all of my different ingredient parameter knowledge. And another reason is that we also, when we award these scholarships, we also get a book that goes along with it. So I got this book, which I'll kind of just touch on at the end. So in general, what is the course? This course is for people who are, I would say, my opinion, in the brewing industry already, or have some knowledge to start with. So yeah, it's for brewers. If you make wine or cider, or you distill, or you make kombucha, you probably have enough knowledge as well of how the brewing process works. So it's basically for people that want to learn how to design something from scratch, recipe-wise, without using these other computer programs and tools. And you can still go back and use those at some point, but it's really nice to have the foundation and the knowledge of why you're doing certain things and how those programs create recipes the way that they do. So I would say if you are just looking to sort of brush up on your skills, you're learning to get more into brewing, and I mean, a lot of brewing is recipe development, and maybe that's something that you have struggled with. This would be a good course for you. It's short. It's about a month long, maybe 5 weeks, and it's all online. So it's self-paced, so you could do it anytime, like day or night. I believe there were some time zone issues just because I'm in the Eastern time zone and BC is in the Pacific time zone. So just as far as like emailing goes, but basically everything else is self-paced, and you have access to all of the modules on your first day. So basically you log in, once you like have been set up as a student through KPU, you have access to all of the modules, and they're broken down kind of as you would imagine. So you've got grain, water, hops, batch size, and then like minerals and other salt additions and things like that. So you basically go through each ingredient more in depth, and then you sort of like work through the modules to get to the end. And the nice thing is that you can do them over and over. It's not like you do the module and then it's like it's gone, but you can download the PowerPoint that comes with it, and then there's also a video where it's explained to you in detail by the instructor, Alec. And it's always just really nice to start with the basic for ingredients. Oh, I forgot yeast. Yeast. So it's really nice to start with, okay, if I'm brewing a beer and I want a batch size of 1,000 liters and I want it to be 5% ABV, here's how we do that. And so what's kind of nice is that throughout the entire program, throughout the course, you kind of have this same recipe that you've been working with through the PowerPoint. And so every time you refer back to, what your math problems, they correspond to that basic recipe. And yeah, so it helps to follow along. If you're like, well, what were we doing again? You can kind of go back to the beginning and like refresh yourself on, we're doing I want to say it was like an Irish red or something like kind of just standard, like, middle of the road ABV type of thing. So I would say if you don't have any previous chemistry knowledge, you'll probably be okay in this course, because there are things that are explained to you and maybe you don't need like the detailed in-depth chemistry background to understand what they are, but as long as you can kind of understand what they are in terms of writing the recipe, then you should be fine. Obviously, brewing is a science, and if you have a science background, you'll probably do really well, and you'll understand it like pretty easily. I had done chemistry like many years ago, and then when I went back to school to do my master level brewing class, it's already been 6 years, and so I just thought, well, it's rusty, but hopefully, I'll understand what he's talking about, and I felt like pretty comfortable. So another thing is you want to probably be comfortable with math. There's a lot of math in brewing. You're determining volumes and like additions, and you're trying to convert, like maybe milliliters to liters or gallons to liters. How to scale up, how to scale down, percentages, grain weights, grain volume, all sorts of things. So I would say you should be pretty comfortable with math. It's basic math. It's addition, division, multiplication, etc. But it really is helpful, because if you struggle with math, you might kind of stumble like towards the beginning with what we're doing and why we're doing it. Alec is great with going through the slides like one at a time, and every like section has the certain calculations that you need to know, and so he explains how to do them. And what's nice is that even though it's pre-recorded, he writes it out as if you're like in a class and he's writing on the whiteboard. So he kind of writes out how you would do the equations and get your solution. And so I really appreciate that, because I'm a visual learner, and so just looking at the equation doesn't necessarily teach me what I'm supposed to know. So having him talk it through, write it out, and then I can pause and like do it on my own and practice it was very helpful. So that was like a nice that was a nice part of the class. So would I recommend this course? I would say overall, yes. I think that I learned a lot. I probably learned more than I will ever use, and I've probably already forgotten a lot of it. But I would say in general, it's anytime you're learning, it's beneficial. So I would never say don't take this course. It's just something extra for you to have where you can refer back to the notes or the equations that you did, in the future, and use it in your job and, in your daily life. And so I would recommend it for anybody. If you're not in the industry as far as production goes, or you don't brew at home, I wouldn't say that it would necessarily be for you, because you're not really going to be using this information probably on a daily basis. Although maybe you work in procurement or logistics, and you need to order ingredients, and you need to work with production staff to know how much to order in advance and how much to, like if you do hops on contract, and you need to know how much you need like year to year so that you can order and have that contract put in place. That would probably, this would be something for you that would maybe help. So in general, I think it would benefit anybody who works in production and just wants to sort of, freshen up their science of brewing and their chemistry. And also too, it kind of can help with maybe cutting back on waste and loss. No one wants to see beer get wasted or go down the drain, because the recipe didn't turn out, or maybe you didn't have the right mineral or salt additions, or your acids, in your mash. Like, there's all sorts of things to think about. And so this can really help you figure out what you need to be doing at what step in the brewing process, so that your beer turns out in the best way that it can. So there's that to think about too. So I would say the pros of this course, as far as like pros and cons go, it was very detailed. I can tell that Alec is very good at math. So he's very skilled at math. So again, a lot of detail that maybe, you might use, and maybe you learn it in the course, and then you're like, okay, I'll set that aside and I won't need that like ever again. Or you dig it out when it comes to that point in time. But so very detailed. And again, as a very detail-oriented person who has a lot of questions, I appreciated that, because again, we looked in depth at each ingredient as far as like building the recipe goes. And so each module was like a separate ingredient. Another thing I just remembered, I forgot to talk about, is that we also talked about carbonation and how to carbonate your beer, and how to, do that, whether it's injected like CO2 gas or it's bottle conditioning, and how much yeast that you would use. So, these are all really important things, and I loved the detail that was included in this course. And then I would say, yeah, it's very useful in a production setting. I have worked in beer production, and now I'm in wine production, but I see a lot of crossover. And because I am still brewing at home, I want to be able to create the best recipes I can. I actually have a coworker who has asked me to maybe sort of regularly make him beer. And so I thought, well, this would be great. Like, if I'm actually brewing beer to, someone's going to pay me to do it, I want to know what the cost of my ingredients is going to be, the time, etc., so that I can price it out and give him an accurate price to pay me for this batch of beer. One of the reasons that I was like interested in doing this course. So some of the cons, I would say, if you struggle with math, you might struggle with this class. And I say that as someone that's pretty adept at math, but I think it was just the way that the equations are written in the PowerPoint slides. I also found that Alec has a way of writing some of the equations that are not familiar to me, in terms of how he writes his units, if that makes sense. Like the way that he writes liters, or he sets up his equations, the way that they're typed on the PowerPoint. It confused me. And so there were a few times where I lost track of what we were talking about, and I had to stop and go back. And it sort of tripped me up when I would get to the practice quiz at the end of each module. You have like a quiz that's like a few questions long, and they're pretty much all math. Every section has a little math quiz. And I would get confused on like what units we were using, because it was written differently. And so I had to sort of pause and think about it. And that is nice, because when you're taking the quiz, it's not timed. You can take it as many times as you want. Even if you do well, you get 8 out of 10, you can still take it again. But you can pause, refer to your notes, do the math, write it out, and then like go and fill in your quiz form. So that was a struggle for me personally. It might not be for everybody, but I noticed that as I went along, that I was a little confused as to, what I was seeing written on the PowerPoints. The course time frame I found was very short. So what I mean by that is how long you have to actually complete the course. We were given initially, I think, 4 weeks, but for some reason we had an extra 2 weeks or so to finish the course. And because of my schedule, I was only able to start the course maybe like a week or two in. So it was very jam-packed. And in my mind, I thought, well, I start this course and then I'll finish it when I finish it within, 4 to 6 months or something. And that was not the case. You had a certain deadline that you were supposed to finish. And that would be doing more than one module per week, which is doable. But if you're working, or you have family commitments, or you're traveling, it was a lot to do. So I was pretty much doing 2 modules a week. I think there were 7 or 8. And I was trying to just sort of like get through it as fast as I could because I didn't want to run out of time. So that's something to think about as well. However, like I said, it's not live, so you can do it at 2 in the morning if that works for you, or at 3 in the afternoon. So that was a little stressful for me because I was worried I wasn't going to finish. If you need help in real time, say you have a question about a math problem, or I had a lot of questions about certain things, and I wrote out like an email list, and I emailed it to my contact person, and then she would go and send it on to Alec and then get an answer and respond to me. And so doing all that took a few days. And if you need help in real time, like say you're at a part of the course where you're stuck and you can't move on, it's just so confusing, I would think that it would be difficult to get a more rapid response. Again, there is a time difference depending on where you are, but also, they are teaching classes at KPU in real time, and so they're busy and they have lives. So I found that was a little frustrating, but my questions were not needing an immediate answer, so I didn't really worry about it. But maybe for someone else, that could be something that trips you up a little bit. And then the last thing that I wish we could have done was download the video itself. So you get all of the PowerPoint slides and all of the extra documents. There's a CO2 chart, there's an info sheet on using your hemocytometer, like things like that. And so those you can download and keep and print and do whatever you want with. However, for me, it would be helpful to have the video to go back to and have him, watch it so he can walk me through it. And those you lose access to after the course is over. So that was a little bit of a bummer. However, KPU does have a YouTube channel. And while they might not have all of this information on the channel, they do have a lot of short videos about the brewing process and different tips and tricks and things like that. And so I would highly recommend subscribing to their channel and watching their videos. So overall, I think apply for this course. If you're not sure, go through the syllabus, reach out to me, think about what this course will do for you. If it's just a for fun kind of thing, it is a lot of time and brain power that you're going to be using. So I would say if it's not going to actually benefit you, like in your career or your daily job, maybe look at another scholarship that we offer. I wanted to touch on this book now. So we also get a book that is part of the scholarship package. And the book that was offered, I already had because I already have a whole library of beer books. And so this is one that I hadn't actually had yet, but I've been wanting for years. So this is New Brewing Lager Beer by Greg Noonan. And there's 2 reasons that I feel like this book is special to me. One is I am not really a huge lager lover, and I brewed a lot of lagers in my life, through work, and I did it because I had to, and I followed someone's recipe and the steps, and that was it. But I wanted to learn more in depth how to make a good lager, either at home or, in my future endeavors. And so this is like the #1 book that you can get as far as brewing lager goes. And I have wanted it for like 10 plus years, and it's always been on my Amazon wish list, and I ask for it for my birthday and for Christmas and etc. And then something else comes up that looks more fun, and so I get that book instead. So when I realized that I already had the book that was included with the scholarship, I asked if I could have this book instead. The other thing is that Greg Noonan is a legend in the brewing community. He has passed on now, but he started the Vermont Pub and Brewery in Burlington, Vermont. And I have had a long, twisty journey from the US to Canada, and I ended up in Vermont, the last place I ever thought I would be, and I'd never been there before ever in my life. And the first place that my husband and I went to when we were trying to sort out our emergency situation was the Vermont Pub and Brewery. And I wasn't brewing at the time. I didn't know who Greg was. It was just like a place to go in downtown Burlington that everyone loved and made beer, and I love beer. So I was like, great, okay. And then many years later, I actually joined a quilt guild in Burlington because I ended up living in Vermont and Montreal in that area for like almost 12 years. And one of my friends that was also in the quilt guild was married to Greg's son. And I just was like, oh my God, your former, father-in-law is like a rock star. He's famous. And so I've just wanted this book forever. So full disclosure, I have not had time to read it, but even when I just flip through it, I can tell that there is a lot of like detailed science and math. Crushing the malt, and he's got a whole diagram of like how to crush the malt and how fine it should be, and how the mill should be set. There is so much information in here. I mean, it might scare you when you look at these charts and these graphs and you think, I don't know anything about science, but some of the things we do understand. We understand how to taste and what happens when you get off flavors that you don't want and things like that. So I mean, this is like how old school it is. A carboy with a blow off. I mean, and this is how I started brewing, so I love it. But like many beer books with beer nerds, we basically have a shelf of books and we've read like 20 pages out of all of them. So I don't know when I will get to read this whole entire thing, but I'm very excited to have it like in my library. And so I'm hoping when I have a bit of downtime, I will be able to get like the basics, and then I will actually brew my first lager at home, because I've never done that. I've only brewed it at work on like a commercial setup on a large brew house where I've got glycol chillers and temperature control. So it's gonna be a little different at home, but I'm willing to try it and, use my beer fridge if I have to. So yeah, that is my quick, albeit I hope detailed review of the KPU Beer Recipe Design Course. They do also offer a separate course that is just chemistry for brewing. So it's things that you need to know for brewing, but it's at a lower level. It's not as specific as putting the recipe together and putting all those elements together. So that is another option for you if you wanted to try that first and then maybe do this course afterwards. I hope if you had questions or, were wondering about certain things, I touched on those topics and I answered your questions. If not, you can email me. I'll put my email up on the screen. You can find me on Instagram. I have 2 different beer related accounts, and I am the Pink Boots Canada events coordinator. So, I'm always trying to plan some fun events for you. So look out for those. But otherwise, I appreciate you taking the time to sit with me while I talked about my scholarship. All right, cheers.